And if everybody could join me in welcoming our fundraising expert, Sophie. Thank you so much for coming and talking to the Changemakers community tonight about getting growth grants.
Thank you, Lucas. It's such a privilege to be part of your Changemakers growth series, and especially the first meeting that you're doing. I think it's an amazing initiative to support and provide guidance to everybody starting and growing their organisations. So I have been at TERN, as Lucas said, since March, April. I am going to bring my experience, not just from TERN, but obviously from previous fundraising roles that I've had across the years. I really want this to be useful information to you. So please interrupt if there's jargon I'm using, if I'm going too fast, too slow, please put some comments in the chat and we can adjust how we lead this. As we say, it's the first time we're doing this, so we just want to be able to adapt to what your requirements are so that you feel more enabled to go out there and to get the funding you need to grow your organizations. So Lucas, if you are able to start sharing. So if we go into the first slide, and I'll just go through what we're going to cover this evening. Hopefully this will only take 15-20 minutes to go through in terms of the slides that I've prepared, and leave lots of time for us to delve more deeply into the areas which are of particular interest for you guys. So we're going to go through some of the fundraising basics, what fundraising is. I know a lot of you will have had some training already from Lucas and have a lot of the basics, but just to make sure we're all on the same page when we start. And then we're going to look about how you prepare to start fundraising, what steps you can do before you even get to applying for funding for your organisation, and then what the process looks like. And these are just how I do it. It doesn't mean this is the only way of doing it at all. It's just to give you some kind of structure which you can use to develop your own style of fundraising. Thanks, Lucas. So some of you will have done the grant funding training session. If you haven't, it's available on the link which Lucas sent you out before this workshop. That really talks through some of the different types of funding that's out there. Restricted funding and unrestricted funding, the differences between those, whether it's restricted for a particular project you're doing, a particular salary that you might have applied for funding for, or whether it's unrestricted and can be used for any work that you're doing in the organisation towards certain impact goals that you've given to the funder. Then there's some jargon you may come across which we want to go through. So outputs, outcomes, theories of change. If these are things you're familiar with, that's great. If there's not, we can go into more detail on them later, because a lot of applications now are asking for more of that detail of exactly what your outputs are going to be and how that's going to help you to achieve the outcomes you want to get at the end of your project. I think, yeah, thank you. So the next thing is, what are your current funding sources? If you could just put some of the funding sources you've currently got in the chat. If you haven't got any yet and you're at the first stages, that's no problem. But just for me to get an idea of what types of fundings we're already getting into the system and where we might have some struggles. So trusts and foundations, that's great. Thanks, Yusuf. Anyone else? Art healing. Okay. Is that a particular grant for art healing, Maria? Yeah, great. And what sort of organisation is that from? We've got foundations and sometimes councils on a very small scale from Aruba. One from the National Grid, the National Lottery. Amazing. So already we've got a real range of different types of funders that you're all accessing. Migration Exchange, fantastic. That was a very competitive grant to go for, so congratulations on that one. Individual donations, make it happen. Fantastic. That just gives me a sense of the types of funders we're going for at the moment. Has anyone done more crowdfunder type funding or big give, anything like that? MSN, Unlimited, yeah. No, no in terms of crowdfunding. Oh, yeah, crowdfunders. Right, okay, so as part of the Ideas into Action, that's great, that's really helpful. And postcode lottery, and you were successful with postcode lottery. I think actually we might need to get you leading this if you were successful, because I was unsuccessful. I've been unsuccessful 3 times with postcode lottery. So that's an amazing achievement. Well done. Okay, but that's a great opportunity. And actually having that and being able to say that you've achieved that fundraising with postcode lottery will help you with other applications as well. Okay, let's move on to the next slide then. Thanks, Luke. So what is fundraising? As we've talked about, it's different forms of capital. It comes through different types of organisations and opportunities. In the UK, that's mainly through family foundations and trusts, corporate foundations and trusts, national bodies like the National Lottery or the Arts Council, and then through different types, which could be individual giving, major donor giving, which is generally considered maybe over £10,000, and then through crowdfunders or things like the Big Give, where there's match funding often involved and you're inviting individuals to give to your cause. So very different forms of capital that you can raise. Each have their own lengths of duration. The size can be from a few £100s to over millions. The expectations of the funder and what you need to deliver in return can vary hugely. But what's important to remember is that conversion timelines are not short. We say on average it's 3 months. Some can be an awful lot longer than that. They could be up to 9 months, a year. And because of different funding rounds happening at each times of year, then you can have to wait quite a long time till the next funding round. So some of these funding schemes that we're looking at are long-term initiatives. They're not necessarily for the short term. Thanks, Lucas. This was an interesting report which I found online recently. We'll see the link to it in the next page. But what it looks at is, what do funders consider? What are the information that they're looking at when they're looking at an organisation's application? Or if they're looking perhaps as unsolicited, if no unsolicited applications are allowed, then they may be just doing their own research as to which organisations they want to support. These are the types of information that they'll be looking at. We're going to go through the top 6 in a minute, but I think it's worth just being aware of the variety of information that can help a funder make up its decision about whether or not they want to partner with you to achieve the impact you're wanting to deliver. So that can range from policies which you might want in place, like safeguarding or equal opportunities, or it can be some background to your organisation, whether there's a small paragraph which gives an introduction to the different people in your leadership team, or the directors, the trustees, whatever your structure may be. Finance, being able to quickly provide for them your annual accounts, an organisational budget, perhaps your management accounts, which would be a more up-to-date position of your finances, especially if it's been several months since your last end of financial year and your financial audited accounts or unaudited, but just declared, are less up to date. There's also on there things like social media and your website, public information that they can find out about your organisation before they even come to you. I met a funder today and they had done their research incredibly well, and they had been looking at the website before the meeting, and they were then talking to us about information they found there. So that was a significant funder, and for them to have taken that time to do that research themselves before they met with us, I found impressive. And I think it's just a good learning that information we put out there on our websites needs to be as up to date as possible, because they will be referring to it and they will consider it part of your application. Thanks, Lucas. So the top 6 which came up on that are your accounts, your published accounts. So your financial position, they'll be looking to see, are you If you have published accounts, and I appreciate not everybody will yet, but you will get to a point where you will have published accounts, and they'll be wanting to look and see whether or not you're working sustainably, whether there's any irregularities in your accounts, and that's fine if there are, but then make sure you're able to explain any irregularities. They're wanting to make sure that if you're a charity, that you have submitted those accounts on time. And unfortunately, with our Charities Commission system, if it's not done on time, it will say that on the website forevermore. There's no way of getting rid of that. So it's just one to be aware of, that you will want to try and get those submitted on time. Then any application that you've submitted, naturally, that's going to be one of their first point of calls, but I think it's just worth remembering that's not the only piece of information they're assessing. They'll also look at your financial budget, whether that's an organisational budget as a whole, or whether it's a particular project that you're wanting to raise money for. That's crucial to them. And what they're looking for there is to make sure it's realistic. If you're saying you're going to support 100 children to go to university, is that realistic that you're going to be able to do that with the resource and the time allocation that you're suggesting in your budget, and the time frame that you're working towards? They'll also want to see whether or not you have received this level of funding previously from anywhere else. So they're wanting to see a steady progression in your size of organisation. If you're relatively small at the moment and you apply for quite a large grant, unfortunately, you're unlikely to be successful, because they won't necessarily feel that you have the governance and organisational structure in place to manage that. So it's about making a slow progress towards your goals, or working with another larger organisation who can support you in doing a joint application, perhaps. So there's ways around it, but just making sure that it's comparative to your size. Grant reports. When you have successfully received grants, like all these ones that you've listed just now in the chat, your end of grant report is really important. I've spoken to funders before who say that is their key piece of information as to whether they will ever give another grant again. It's not the actual application, it's recognising, did you achieve what you wanted to in your piece of work that you were doing? Are you learning from any mistakes? Are you reflecting on those? Are you being able to absorb those into any ongoing work that you're doing? So your grant report is just as important as your first application that you make. If you're a charity, then your trustees annual report gives a narrative to the annual accounts that you produce. So it's being able to articulate what your vision and future is, perhaps for the next couple of years, how your organisation has developed, and how your impact has grown. Now, some organisations are moving away from producing one annual financial account with the trustees report to more of an impact report, which is something that you can produce as a CIC or as a charity. You can produce it at the end of your financial year, and you don't need to wait for your accounts to be ready to be able to share that with an audience. So it's worth thinking about whether that's something that you might be able to do. It can be just 2 pages, giving a snapshot of what you have achieved in the last year. But it's just really helpful for funders to see that you've reflected on your time and how you are then moving forward. And then an organisational strategy. Where are you wanting to go? What's your plan next? Next slide, please. So, to summarise, the things we've just gone through on the previous page will enable you, once you've got all those things together, to get together your vision, your aims, your mission. What are your outputs and outcomes, and therefore your theory of change? What is the impact that you want to have through your work? What is it that you have a burning passion for that you're going to change in the world? And they just want that articulated in a succinct way. And if you've got that in your own mind, you'll find that filling in an application form is so much less complicated, because you'll know exactly what you're trying to achieve. And then preparing your budget, which reflects that work that you want to do, whether that's a project budget or an annual budget. Having that ready before you even start to research where you're going to apply for is really helpful. And then it's fundraising time. Thank you, Luke. So this is the process, how I see it. It's a funnel. You start with researching often hundreds of organizations, trying to network, trying to see what's out there. And then you have to prioritize whether or not this is the right fit for you and your organization, whether it's right at this stage in your growth, and whether you have the capacity to meet any timelines which have been given. It's about trying to engage with those individuals that you're trying to get money from. All of this is about relationships. It's not just about money. It's about developing a long-term relationship with a funder. So that initial contact with your lead engagement is really important. That outreach, that being able to have a conversation with them, and just for them to begin to understand what it is that you are wanting to achieve from the outset, and for you to understand where they're coming from and what their overall aims are as well. Then it's about the bid application, hopefully success, and then stewarding that relationship. Thanks, Lucas. So this just summarizes pretty much the same thing, but in terms of stages that you're going to go through, just to recognize the importance of each of those stages, rather than, tempting as it is, just to jump in at stage 4 with an application, recognizing the need to do stages 1 to 3 to make sure that you're using your time to the best ability, because fundraising does take time, and the success rates that we'll go through in a minute can be very varied, and therefore making sure you've got the right funders, the right fit, and you've weighed that up and make sure that that's the best opportunity for you. Make sure you've got some kind of relationship, if it's possible, with the funder beforehand, before you get to stage 4, is really important, as is stewarding that relationship after you've been successful. Thanks, Luke. So this is a little bit of a sobering slide for us, but I think it's important to go through this because fundraising can be quite a lonely task, and it can feel quite disappointing when you've put everything into an application and then they come back and say, it was an amazing project, we think the work you're doing is fantastic, you fit our criteria, but we just can't fund you. These are the success rates currently, and there's a report called the UK Charity Grant Success Rate Report, which you can Google and find. We can put the link in maybe in the chat. Trusts and foundations at the moment vary between 20 to 30% in terms of success rates. Now, within that, that's your average. If you look at warm relationships and reapplying for a grant, it can be up to 65%. Or even higher. If you're looking at cold calling to an organization who've never heard of you before, it can be much lower, and it can be under 10%. So getting that right fit increases that percentage significantly. And what you want to do is to be in a point where you've got some kind of relationship with them, they're absolutely the right fit, and then you're getting to closer to a 40 to 50% chance of success, unless you're going for some of the very largest foundations out there. Corporate grants, there's been some corporate grants recently which are honestly a little bit more around marketing for the corporation than they are actually about funding organizations. So one of them had success rates as low as 6%. Likewise with central government, they can be extremely low. But again, if you've got a relationship with somebody in that sector who can make that introduction, that can increase that significantly. Going back to corporates, those corporate grants which are publicised are the ones which are particularly low. There are a lot more funders in the corporate world, which if they align with your sector, will give you a much higher success rate, but it's just important to be aware of the differences. And then if you look at the lottery and public foundations, they vary significantly. The Heritage Trust would be up near 60%, whereas the Arts Council might be much lower, down at around 10%. So just do your research to make sure that you're applying for the one that fits you best, and find out and be prepared to know what the success rate is. Thanks, Lucas. So finding funders. You can use this code here just to go onto our Notion page, which gives you more information about funding organisations. But some of my top tips: look at peers in your sector, see who they're being funded by. If they're a charity, then they'll have their published accounts, and on those accounts they will have all their, at least their restricted funders, if not unrestricted funders. Research what those partners are doing in terms of funding across the sector. Secondly, map your organisations and networks. So even if you're a newly established organisation, you will have started to create relationships, whether that's with peer organisations, with location-based sites. So it might be your local community building, or it might be your local council if you've had to get authorisation for a particular activity. Start to think about who are those people that your organisation is connected with, and where might I be able to discuss with them, not even necessarily look to them as funders, but where might I be able to talk to them about funding opportunities in that sector or location. And then there are sector resources out there. So there's a database called 360 Grant Nav, and more organisations are publishing the grants that they give on that database. So you're able to see directly the size of grants being given, the number of grants being given, and the type of organisations that are receiving those grants. As I mentioned before, the Charities Commission and the annual accounts, it's kind of one of those places that I tend to live in, which to some people might be extremely boring, but there is so much information in there that I will keep coming back to that and suggesting it. Charity databases. Refugee Council publish a weekly update of funding sources, which I actually find very helpful. It is quite broad, but they're always up to date and telling you when the deadlines are going to come around in the next few weeks. So it's really helpful. Charity Excellence, likewise, I think probably you've heard about that before in your previous fundraising, but there's a way of searching on there to see what grants are available, and then starting to align your application through them as well. So definitely worth a look. Once you start to get into this fundraising world, you'll find that there are also groups on Facebook. So there are Trusts and Foundations groups on Facebook, which are actually really helpful to me, just in terms of who else is applying for particular grants, when have they heard back. If I'm still waiting to hear back on something and I haven't heard yet, people will start to post in there when they're hearing back. So it could be worth looking on Facebook. I know it's an old-fashioned platform, but there is quite a community of foundations on there, of organisations looking for funding on there. There is also a new resource called The List. If you look at just Google search The List and fundraising, they now actually have a website, because so many trusts and foundations have been changing and pausing applications recently. One individual in this sector has started to put together which organisations are on hold, on pause, when they're likely to come back on again, and whether they're rethinking their strategy. So it's a really useful resource to go into as well. Thanks, Lucas. So once you've done all your research, think about whether this is the right application for you. Don't try to rewrite what you're doing to fit someone else's funding purpose. Because you might end up doing something slightly different. You might have mission drift and end up changing your mission to fit your funders' requirements. And B, because they're unlikely to fund you if they can see that that's not your core reason for existing. If it says there are no unsolicited applications, which more and more trusts and foundations are doing because they're being inundated by applications, then there are some ways of getting in front of them. They're just trying to reduce the number of individuals often sending out AI-generated applications, spam, which they just don't have the staff to deal with. So look at who they've funded previously, look at who their trustees are, think about whether there's any connections that you might have to those individuals, either other organisations who've been funded or the trustees who are there. and see whether or not you can then get an introduction to the organisation. Thanks, Lucas. Yeah, deciding not to apply is a really worth decision, because actually you might be saving yourself a lot of time over the next few weeks. So don't think, oh, I've wasted all this time, I've done all this research, and now I've decided it's not worth it. That's good time spent. And just keep a note of those organisations you've made those decisions on, because you might come back to them at a later stage and they might then be appropriate. Thanks. So engaging with funders. Again, it's about relationships. You can see some themes coming through here. This is all about building those relationships. So how can you get in front of those funders? Making the right connection can take time, but it is really worth it. Now, if it's a trust and foundation, then that could be through a simple email asking a few extra questions about your application before writing a formal application, just starting to engage with them, making sure they're not obvious questions which are answered on their website, but if there's some particular peculiarities about your project or about your organisation, think about how you can ask those questions. It might be about, if it's corporate, looking on LinkedIn to see who is engaged in that organisation, and then seeing who you're connected to and whether somebody can make an introduction for you. Most important is personalising all your communications. In all of these engagements that we're trying to make, these people are being inundated, so they need to know exactly what you could give to them and how your two organisations align, so that they can be engaged with you from the get-go. So make sure that you're personalising it as much as possible, and be confident. It is a partnership you're seeking. You're not out there with a begging bowl asking for money. You're wanting to help them to deliver their impact that they have been asked to do as an organisation. So you can partner with them to help them to achieve what they need to achieve. It's not just a one-way relationship. And then think about the alignments and key wins that can be delivered through this partnership for them. Thanks. These are some ways that you can get out there and start to make connections if you don't already have those connections. So it could be a location-based awards, a local borough council that does awards for volunteering, awards for social media campaigns for an organisation. So start to look out there and see what awards might be available. Honestly, not that many people apply for some of the smaller ones, and they're quite easy to access. So it's worth thinking about what's out there and what can you start to do, because again, those are things you can talk about then in your applications, and you can talk to those networks when you go to the events about other funding opportunities. Depending on the focus of your work, think about attending trade shows, industry-wide shows, where you've got a large number of potential corporate funders in one place that you could have conversation with. Think about the discussions you can have on a stand, prepare your questions in advance so you can start to engage with them, and always think about what that follow-up step could be. How can I deepen this relationship and take it further? Likewise, you can, if you're holding your own events, you can think about who you might want to invite along to your event, so that they can be amazed and wowed by the product that you're offering. And it just engages people at another level. So these are all sort of slightly more out there ways that you can engage with funders rather than just sitting behind your screen and typing emails. Thanks, Lucas. So now you're ready to write your application. So if it's trusts and foundations or statutory funding, then you need to think about deadlines. Think about what they are, whether they might close early, because quite a lot have recently, and make sure you've got the time to submit an application before starting all the work of drafting it. And when I'm talking about statutory funding here, that might be central government, it might also be local council. And there are both streams of funding, some more accessible than others. So think about what might be best for you. Download the application forms. If you start doing it online, you may well lose the information, it may crash, and it will take you a lot longer. It's also great to have your copies of your answers so that you've got them for future applications, because some of the questions are going to be very similar that you'll be answering. And once you've drafted it once, you're going to have it for the long term. Then think about the key criteria that the funder has prioritized and just keep coming back to that. So I was doing one recently and I had 3 words. It was London, entrepreneur, community. And I just had those 3 words that I kept coming back to. Have I answered this question thinking about those 3 specific things? Or am I just slightly drifting off? Those are the things they're particularly concerned about. Make sure that every word that you use counts towards that. And be mindful of word count. You can spend a long time trying to reduce word count. So being sure of what the word count is before you start drafting is really important. And just be aware that some platforms count words in different ways, would you believe? So it may be worth just trying to go onto the application portal and trying to see whether your word count matches before you get too far through the process. And then use all your research to present your work so that it's relevant to them. So this comes back to their key criteria, but just make sure that as you read through it, you're making it as easy for them to gain access and understand your impact as possible. And then review, get somebody to peer review it for you and then finalize it. It's really helpful to have another pair of eyes on something you've written. You get so close to it by the time you spend a long time in it. Somebody else may just see that there's something missing to somebody who's not so close to this work that needs to be explained. So get somebody else who's not close to it to review it for you and then finalize it and submit. Thanks, Lucas. Corporate funding. This can be when you're not corporate foundations, but when you're going to a corporate and asking for their engagement, you want a couple of pages which summarize your work and give a compelling story of what you're wanting to achieve and how this partner can come with you on that journey. And then you want to write a really short email which just frames your ask. It engages with where they're at, current work that they're doing, where your work fits within that, and making sure that those 2 align closely. Yeah. Lastly, stewardship. So congratulations, you've got your partnership, but then you want to think about how you can engage them on your journey to really see the impact of the work you're doing. The closer they get to the impact of your work, the deeper that relationship is likely to be. If they're able to come and meet some of the people you're supporting, some of the lives that are changed, then they will begin to see in a much more personal way how their money is going to good use. So obviously, make sure your contract's agreed and signed. Make sure there's nothing in there that you're not aware of. Make sure they're appropriately thanked. That can be a letter, a phone call, asking for a meeting, or sending a gift. If you're creating a product and you can send them a gift, send one. It will mean that you are very memorable to them in the future. And then establish what the reporting requirements are. Are they wanting quarterly updates, annual updates? Just make sure that you're meeting their requirements. And then make sure that you're working towards the targets you've agreed, because they will want you to report back on them at the end. And there can well be reasons why you can't achieve them, and that is absolutely fine. But just be sure of where you are in that progress towards your targets and be prepared to explain any changes that are happening along the way. They expect changes to happen. This is real world work that we're doing, and there will be things that happen that might send a curveball and you have to change slightly what you're doing. But just make sure that you know where you are in that journey, and if you're not at the targets you need to be at, why you're not there, so that you can explain it. And then, as we said before, grant period reports are really important at the end of your grant. So make sure that you're thinking about that throughout the grant and what you're going to include. Make sure you've got the photographs, the data you need, any financial reporting that needs to have been established, so that you're in a good position at the end of that to finish the report and to then hopefully ask for some repeat funding for further work. And that is the fundraising process. Thanks, Lucas.
Thank you so much, Sophie. That was great. I've written lots of notes, and I'm going to pop them all into the chats with links and things like that. But I just want to first of all say thank you, Sophie. That was incredibly useful, really informative, and yeah, I mean that was absolutely excellent and nice to not just focus on applications and actually look at the fundraising process as a whole. I've got a few kind of just standout things that, if I may, just very quickly, I think that I found really interesting. I took some notes that said main points, and I think, first of all, it was interesting listening to this because this is exactly what TERN does, right? This is what I've been doing with Sophie, and it is exactly our process. And I think it's really, Sophie streamlined a lot of things at TERN that's helped a lot for us as an organization. And I think some things that really I've noticed is, doing that work beforehand in two sense. First of all, getting your organizational house in order, as it were. So having the right policies. So not that when you're working to an application, you suddenly have to draft a safeguarding policy, but having those right policies ready and there, or having that right volunteer policy is so important. And that also, having your budgets up to date and your financial plans up to date. We are going to do hopefully a session around theory of change. And Sophie mentioned theory of change, and we're hopefully going to do a masterclass around this, which should be really exciting. But what that is it's showing the impact you want to have and when you're going to have it by. It's almost like impact forecasting, but doing it in a way that funders and the sector understands. So having all of these things ready beforehand makes it so helpful when you're in the application stage as well. But it also means having the right approach to fundraising. So, saying that's not for me, that's okay. And there's been a few people, I think, on this call where you've sent me a grant and I've said, I don't think that's right for your organization. And you making that call is okay. That's absolutely fine. And also doing the right research, spending time on that research, right? So if you put 3 steps in the funnel before the application, and I think that's really important, spending time on it. There are so many foundations and trusts and corporates out there that are funding, but go and find the ones that would work for you. And the final thing I want to say is, there's all the maintenance and maintain that relationship, but be bold and get out there and meet people, and things take time. So I can use a very fresh example with TERN, where it's taken 2.5 years of a relationship to get funding, but we've just got funding. And that is very well invested. They're a great funder. They're very friendly. And I feel like, they'll work very closely with us. And hopefully that will bear fruit next year and the year after as well. And so, yes, we didn't get something straight away, but maintaining that relationship, having touch points, introducing them to community, introducing them to events, inviting them to events, keeping them updated, and then presenting to them. They then actually said 2.5 years after meeting them, we'd like you to apply. So it can take a long, long time, but these things do bear fruit as well sometimes. Those are just my sort of points to just reiterate from what everything Sophie said. And just want to say thank you so much. So please, everyone, join me in thanking Sophie. And what's really exciting now is we're going over to the fireside style Q&A. I know there's a lot of questions probably in the chat, which we can try and get to. And I'll have a little look on there. I'm going to post some links in the chat as well, so you'll see me typing away. But for now, I'm going to just stop the recording